but not a blocker for the Surge Mare, and that Tempest Djinn is getting pretty close to lethal by itself.
Yeah, it's currently a 5-4 flyer. Surge Mare can only be blocked by Deputy, so if Ross has something like Unsummon, it could be game over for Reilly, and we could be seeing a game 3.
So there was a Hinterland Harbor in hand for Reilly. Looks like possibly land was already played on this turn. Not clear on that. Merriam potentially has an end step effect.
Looks like an Ether Gust. Not positive, though. Gust could, well, just kind of get rid of anything on the battlefield except for the Deputy. Reilly almost certainly putting that creature on the bottom no matter what gets targeted with the Gust. If it is a Gust, if I was correct in that assessment.
Yeah, I believe that I did get a glimpse of Ether Gust here. Maybe we were paused with the spell on the stack, actually, now that Hinterland Harbor is played.
Yeah, because when it's on the stack, it doesn't get affected by Veil Summer. So he could be wanting to do that while it's on the stack as opposed to once it's on the battlefield. But he also, I think, just wants to save it for something a little more daunting, like a Shifting Ceratops or one of those annoying large threats.
Yeah, so now it's Merriam's turn. He draws. Looks like he has a 6th island in the hand. One shy of lethal with the Tempest Djinn, but theoretically could pump the Surge Mare to 7.
I'm going to tell you exactly how this game's going to end. It's going to be glorious for Reilly. Ross is going to attack with both creatures. Reilly's going to block with the Deputy Detention. Ross is going to pump the Surge Mare. Deputy's going to die. Ben's going to go, my turn. Activate the Incubation Druid, adapt, attack for 5. Ross goes, blow you out with this Ether Gust. Reilly peels Veil Summer, GG. Got too tricky. That's how it's going to end. Yep. Calling it now.
See how it goes. So far, so good. Merriam plays the island and attacks with both creatures. There's that block with the Deputy. Surge Mare pumps, takes the Deputy down. Reilly falls to 1. For your prediction to hold true, Ross has to pass the turn. He does. Anything in the upkeep? No. Reilly draws for turn.
Now, if Reilly drew Shifting Ceratops, Ross is covered from that, I believe, because it costs 4 to cast. So he can hit it when it's on the stack, even though it can't be countered. Ether Gust specifically gets around that.
Here's an attack with the creatures. Here's the adapt. There's the Ether Gust. Oh. And you were wrong. Veil of Summer was not peeled.
It's not that I was wrong. It was just a called shot. Sometimes called shots don't work out.
That's true.
There's no right or wrong. There's only more called shots in the future. Ross Merriam there picking up game 2 and what I think is probably a pretty fine matchup for him. But as we've seen time and time again, sometimes Mono Blue is a victim of its own demise. Stumble on land sometimes. Have a draw that features a little too many counterspells, not enough threats. And if Reilly, starts casting stuff like Hydroid Krasis or even Teferi Time Raveler, that can really stifle the development from the Mono Blue aggro deck. But there we saw game 2. Surge Mare probably did some work in the first half of the game that we didn't see. Tempest Djinn, obviously a pretty big deal because it's just a giant flyer. And that Deputy Detention didn't have anything under it, which only I can assume that Ross just had a dive down for the ability on the Tempest Djinn to protect it.
There's an interesting texture of this matchup. Ben Reilly largely just casting expensive spells for a lot of mana. Frequently, such a creature-heavy deck is not really where you're interested in dive down. But Reilly has those 3 sideboard Deputy of Detentions. We saw one on the battlefield there. That's a card that really makes you want to reach for the dive down.
Right.
Deck lists are open. It's the top 8. Didn't look like anything was under the Deputy, so presumably dive down did catch it.
Yeah, either dive down or a Siren Storm Tamer. Either of those cards can actually stop the triggered ability of the Deputy. I think Ross is playing 1 copy of Tail's End, which gives him a way to interact with that in a different way. But I don't think that that's the card that he actually wants in this matchup. There aren't that many activated abilities he wants to counter, and not that many legendary cards either. Just a couple Shalais and like 8 Planeswalkers. That's about it.
Yeah, 4 Nissu shakes the world, 4 Teferi Time Raveler, as you mentioned, Shalai.
Notably, Reilly only has 1 copy of Shifting Ceratops in the 75, and that card is a nightmare for Mono Blue. So Ross getting a little lucky here that there's not a lot more on the other side of the battlefield, but if Reilly draws it, it could be pretty bad.
So Reilly is going to be on the play here. Mono Blue doesn't do really much in the way of interacting with mana creatures, so these Llanowar Elves decks, they can really pull ahead in the early turns, especially on the play. Merriam was on the draw in game 1, so he lost that one, rallied back, won game 2 on the play, but now he has to win one on the draw.
Yeah, being on the draw against the Llanowar Elves deck is always an uphill battle, because if they start off explosive with the Llanowar Elves or some other stuff, you get in spots where you just can't cast as many spells in a turn as your opponent, and that means that even if you have some counter spells, something's going to stick, and occasionally you're just caught playing too defensively while your opponent is just mono aggressive, just jam, jam, jam. And this mono blue deck sometimes can't handle it. But on the play, I think the mono blue deck is reasonably favored, especially because the Bant Ramp deck doesn't have a ton in the way of actually interacting with stuff like Curious Obsession. But Reilly, after sideboard, not only has 4 copies of Teferi Time Raveler, which is a nightmare for mono blue, but it also has 3 copies of Deputy Detention, an Entrancing Melody, some Mass Manipulations, and a couple of cheap counterspells out of the sideboard like Spell Pierce and Negate if he wants.
All right, we are underway for the deciding game 3. Both players kept on 7 pretty quickly. Turn 2 play is Incubation Druid for Reilly. End stepped, Merriam will flash in a Spectral Sailor. See if there's any Curious Obsessions. There's not. It'll knock Reilly to 19.
Might actually have Curious Obsession, but wants to hold up for Lookhouse Dispersal or Negate or something here to make sure the worst doesn't happen with something like Teferi Time Raveler. Because if Raveler hits the battlefield, the rest of your draw is just neutered. You can't really do a whole lot about it.
Here's a tap for 3 for Reilly, and there is that Teferi Time Raveler.
I'm really curious to see what Ross does here. If he has something like Merfolk Trickster. There it is. Yeah. So he has to play this in response, otherwise he can't play it at all.
So there's Trickster, targets the Incubation Druid.
And now, if Reilly ticks down to bounce something into Teferi dies, decides to just tick up, and now Ross is playing at sorcery speed, and he can't quite get the Teferi off the battlefield yet.
Attack for 3, puts Teferi down to 2. Follow-up's going to be Tempest Shin. That's the best thing that Merriam can do at sorcery speed.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is Ross saying, okay, well, if we're playing at sorcery speed, I can tap out with the best of them. Here's a 3-mana, 3/4 flyer that's only going to get bigger as the game goes.
Time Raveler up to 3. Looks like a Deputy of Detention has been picked up for Reilly. That's bad news for Merriam. That's going to clean up the Tempest Shin. Also going to check the Merfolk Trickster. Yeah,
checking the Trickster is a pretty big deal, but Ross here going to potentially get access to drawing extra cards with Spectral Sailor here, and he can keep the Teferi down on loyalty for a little while. And if he has another follow-up flyer here, he might be in good shape.
Let's see what we can do. Unsummon on the Deputy.
That's not bad. If he wants to keep the Teferi around, now he actually has a chump block with the Incubation Druid. So that Unsummon, while it's not a permanent answer to the Deputy, does get rid of the Incubation Druid permanently.
So that did earn the chump block. Teferi falls to 2 in combat. See what else Merriam can add to the battlefield. He's going to start with an Opt. If he could pick up the combination of Siren Stormtamer and an Island, that could be a pretty big swing in his favor.
Oh, for sure. Just absolutely counters that ability from Deputy Detention. Keeps that Tempest Shin alive a little bit longer. But next turn, Ross is going to be effectively in the same spot he was in the previous turn if he doesn't apply one more creature to the battlefield. Reilly here just kind of treading water, making sure this Teferi sticks around because it kind of stifles Ross's ability to play Trixie.
Merriam really stuck on this scry. Not sure if he wants the card or not.
Ross is notorious for tanking when it comes to Opt. I don't know why. It's just Opt, though. It's never any of the other ones. Sleight of hand, instantaneous. Serum Visions is usually pretty fast. Looks like he did find another creature in that Terramander, and I think that was a good keep. You just want a little more pressure here to contain that Teferi, and you know that your Tempest Shin's going to get caught by this Deputy right now. But that Terramander could get out of hand here shortly.
It's back on Reilly's side. Teferi goes back up to 3. Tap 3 mana, Deputy Detention, takes down the Tempest Shin again, and another Incubation Druid added to the battlefield.
Yeah, so now Ross can just send 2 damage at Teferi. If he has nothing else to play, 2 damage at Teferi, draw a card with the Spectral Sailor, and just keep drawing an extra card every turn, and eventually try to check the Teferi. The problem is that'll give Reilly a window or two to resolve some big spell, whether that's Hydroid Krasis, Nisu Shakes the World. Even something like a Voracious Hydra would be pretty bad for Ross in this spot.
Merriam's going to opt on his turn, and here's a successful called shot. He's going to take his time again.
It's always opt. Now, he goes fast on it when it's a land and he's flooded. But basically at every other juncture, it's, I don't know. And that's fine. Take your time. It's untimed matches.
All right, so the 2 flyers knocked Teferi to 1, and now he has Siren Storm Tamer, but the Deputy Detention already has the Tempest Shin.
Yeah, but that does protect from a future removal spell or something. And the fact that it's a protection spell that gets around a Teferi Time Raveler static effect is key. And here, I can only assume that Reilly is going to... well, I was going to say he was going to adapt the Incubation Druid, but if he has another play in hand, something that's slightly better might be worthwhile.
Teferi to 2. There's land number 6. Here's an adapt and an attack for 3.
Yeah, that I gotta imagine if you're Ross, you're just fist bump or fist. Was it fist? Not fist bumping.
Pumping.
Fist pumping. Why does my brain not work?
It's late in the day, man. Late in the weekend.
Ross here. That is best case scenario. Opponent does nothing. There's very little he can do with 1 mana here, so Ross just going to send 2 creatures at Teferi, 1 at the face. Can just draw a card with Spectral Sailor. Can probably adapt the Terramander pretty soon here.
So the attack put Merriam to 17. Doesn't care too much about that. As you mentioned, 2 creatures at the Teferi, take it down. Storm Tamer will knock Reilly to 18.
It looks like Ross actually has an Essence Capture in hand too, which is quite nice against this Bant Ramp deck. Most of the payoffs here are creatures, specifically that Frilled Mystic that was just found.
So Merriam passes. We go to Reilly. Reilly attacks for 3, again with the Incubation Druid. Merriam will go to 14. Reilly just makes another land drop. End step, Merriam gets to draw a card with the Sailor.
Yeah, and he's dangerously close to adapting the Terramander. He has 2 ops in the grave and an unsummon. 1 more land would allow him to make a 5/5 flyer if he so chooses. But right now he's just content at where he's at.
So the Flyers come in for 3. Post-combat, Merriam casts Tempest Shin. Frilled Mystic shows up, and here's that Essence Capture.
Yeah, you love to see it. Spell Pierce is a blowout here. Frilled Mystic going to counter the Tempest Shin. Spell Pierce going to counter the Essence Capture.
This is a nice window for Reilly. If he has some kind of high-impact spell here, he can really pull ahead.
Yeah, for sure. He's out of gas, but that draw step for the turn is pivotal. It's definitely not a Hydroid Krasis. I think he would have sacrificed a 3 damage attack here by adding 3 points to it. So
it looks like he missed on something huge there. The Mystic traded with the Trickster. The Druid knocked Merriam to 11, but no creatures deployed.
Now Ross here can activate the Terramander's adaptability. I believe he also has Entrancing Melody. Looks like he also has a Tempest Gem too, so he's got a lot of options at his disposal here.
And the race is still more or less even. He's hanging the Terramander back this time. He'll attack with the other 2 flyers, Reilly to 13.
Love it.
It looks like a pass of the turn.
Yeah, and he's just holding that Entrancing Melody as long as possible. Wants to catch a Hydroid Krasis with it. Probably doesn't have a counterspell for the Krasis and wants to make sure that he can contain it if it hits the battlefield.
Another Deputy of Detention for Reilly. It's going to target Terramander. Siren Storm Tamer will defend.
Yeah, and he still has 4 instant sorceries in the graveyard, 2 opt, Essence Capture, and unsummon, so he can still adapt, make a 5/5 blocker for that 3/5 Incubation Druid. You have to imagine that adapt is a little bit better than drawing a card, but there's a chance that the adapt actually gets cheaper as the game goes, whereas the Spectral Sailor's ability doesn't. And if Reilly doesn't attack, it might be more worthwhile to draw a card.
Well,
Ross here.
Yeah, no attacks. He's going to go ahead and make the Terramander large. Won't take long for that to close the game.
Yeah, now Ross has to try to figure out the easiest way to close quickly. He's got 5 flying power right now. Can send Reilly to 8 life with an attack here in the air. Can maybe follow it up with another large creature like a Tempest Gen and threaten lethal on the following turn.
Here's an attack for 6. Reilly falls to 7. And no additional pressure. He'll pass. An attack for 5 from Reilly. Merriam falls to 6. Tap Temple Garden to pass. Ooh, and Step.
And Ether Gust. Now Reilly is going to put it either on top or the bottom of his deck. Going to choose to put it on bottom, obviously. Not a great top deck at this juncture.
Curious Obsession would be lethal here for Merriam.
Benjamin Reilly's going to draw. What's he going to draw?
Time for another called shot.
Become Immense for the win. No blocks. Become Immense. Got him.
That one strikes me as unlikely.
Oh, yeah. You'd also just get, disqualified immediately.
Right. Wouldn't be ideal. So here's that attack for 6. Reilly to 1.
Reilly's going to need a big top deck here to stay in this game. Although Ross does have access to an Entrancing Melody, even if it's a Hydroid Crisis. And there it is.
Despite putting Incubation Druid on the bottom, Reilly just draws another one. Ross Merriam, 2-1 over Ben Reilly.